The night I saw Darius Coleman standing at the front of that room, looking like God had personally pressed and tailored him, I felt my whole body betray me. Because that man, that beautiful, infuriating man, was the same one who had come back to destroy everything I loved. And the worst part? When his eyes found mine across that crowded room, he smiled, like he had been waiting for me. Welcome to our channel, where we bring you emotional stories that stay with you. If you're new here, hit subscribe and the notification bell, so you never miss a story. And if you're returning, thank you. Your support means everything. Now stay until the end, drop a comment with your thoughts, and let's begin. My name is Imani Blackwell, and I have lived on the south side of Chicago my whole life. I was born here, raised here. I learned to ride a bike on Carpenter Street, got my heart broken for the first time behind the rec center on 69th, and buried my grandmother 3 blocks from the house she lived in for 40 years. This neighborhood is not just where I sleep. It is who I am. I teach 7th grade English at Dunbar Prep, which is maybe 8 minutes from my front door, depending on the light at Cottage Grove. I have been there for 11 years. I know my students by name, by story, by the particular way each one of them goes quiet when something at home is not right. I know which ones come to school hungry. I know which ones are brilliant and have never once been told so. This work is not a job to me. It is a calling. So when I started hearing whispers in October about a development company buying up blocks in our neighborhood, I paid attention. At first it was just talk. Mrs. Patterson from my church said her landlord sold the builder without telling any of the tenants. Then Deshaun, one of my former students, told me his mother got a letter saying her lease would not be renewed come spring. Then I drove past the corner of 71st and King Drive one Tuesday morning and saw orange construction fencing around a lot that used to have a beauty supply store, a Caribbean restaurant, and a tax office that had been there since before I was born. I started asking questions. The answers I got back were all pointing to the same name, Coleman Capital Group, a Chicago-based investment and development firm. Big money, new money, the kind of operation that had lawyers and lobbyists and city council members on speed dial. I did not connect the name to anyone I knew. Coleman is not an unusual name. I did not think twice about it. A woman named Brenda Okafor organized a community meeting. She was a long-time block club president, sharp and no nonsense, the kind of woman who had been fighting for this neighborhood since the 90s and had the gray locks to prove it. She booked a gymnasium at the community center for a Thursday evening in November and spread the word through every church group, school email list, and neighborhood Facebook page she could find. I showed up early to help set up chairs. About 80 people came. Parents, seniors, small business owners, a few younger folks who had grown up here and come back, teachers from my school, a pastor from the Baptist Church on Wentworth. The energy in the room was anxious but focused. People were scared and they wanted answers. Brenda opened the meeting and laid out what she knew. Coleman Capital Group had quietly acquired 14 properties over the past 18 months. 3 apartment buildings, 2 commercial strips, a parking lot, and several vacant lots the city had been sitting on for years. The plan, based on documents one of the tenants had obtained, was to demolish and redevelop the area into mixed-use luxury housing and retail. Starting price on the new units was going to be well above what anyone currently living in the neighborhood could afford. People started talking all at once. A woman near the back started crying. An older man in a Cubs jacket stood up and said his family had owned their home for 30 years, and he wanted to know if they were coming for homeowners too. A young mother asked what was going to happen to the school. I was standing along the side wall, listening, when the side door to the gymnasium opened. 3 people walked in. 2 of them I did not recognize, a woman in a blazer carrying a folder and a younger man in a gray coat who looked like an assistant. They sat near the front. The 3rd person stopped just inside the door. He was tall, broad across the shoulders in a way I remembered even before my brain caught up with my body. He was wearing a dark coat, no tie, a charcoal suit underneath that fit in the way expensive things fit people who are used to expensive things. His head was freshly cut, his beard shaped clean. He looked like money and confidence, and something else I did not want to name. He looked exactly like Darius Coleman. Because it was Darius Coleman. I felt the air leave my chest. He scanned the room the way people do when they walk into a space they own, easy and unhurried, and then his eyes landed on me. Stopped, and he smiled. Not a big smile, just the corner of his mouth, like he was not surprised at all, like he had known I would be standing right there. I did not smile back. Brenda noticed the new arrivals, and her voice went flat in that particular way it does when she is holding herself together. She said the representatives from Coleman Capital Group had agreed to come and address the community directly, and she asked them to come to the front. Darius walked to the front of that gymnasium like he belonged there. His assistant set up a small presentation on a laptop. The woman in the blazer stood beside him, and for the next 20 minutes I stood against that wall and watched the boy I had loved at 17 explain to my neighbors, in very calm and very polished language, why their displacement was actually good for them. He did not use the word displacement. He used words like revitalization and investment and long-term community benefit. He talked about new jobs and updated infrastructure and a community fund his company was establishing. He had slides. He had numbers. He had the kind of smooth, reasonable voice that I knew from growing up with him. He had practiced. People asked hard questions. He answered every one of them without flinching. He was good at this. I hated how good he was at this. When Brenda opened the floor for general comments, I raised my hand. Darius looked at me. Something moved behind his eyes, but his face stayed even. I said, "My name is Imani Blackwell. I teach at Dunbar Prep 2 blocks from the properties your company has purchased. I have students whose families live in those buildings. I want to know, specifically, what your plan is for the families who cannot afford to stay once this development goes up. Not the fund, not the language in your slide deck. What actually happens to the people?" The room went quiet. Darius looked at me for a moment longer than necessary. Then he said, "That is the most important question anyone has asked tonight, and I want to answer it properly. Can we talk after?" I said there was nothing we needed to discuss privately that could not be said in front of everyone in this room. A few people clapped. He nodded slowly. He said, "Fair enough." And then he answered the question. I will be honest. His answer was not nothing. There were actual relocation resources, an extended lease program, a preference policy for current residents in the new affordable units. It was not enough, but it was not nothing. The meeting ended without resolution, the way these things always do. People filed out in clusters, still talking, some exchanging numbers with Brenda to stay organized. The energy was still charged, but less panicked than when we started. I grabbed my coat and my bag and walked out the side door into the November cold. Chicago in November does not play. The wind came off the lake and hit me before I even got to the bottom of the steps. I pulled my coat tighter and started walking toward my car. I heard footsteps behind me. Steady, unhurried. I stopped walking before he said a word. He came around to my side so I could see him. He was not smiling now. He looked at me the way he used to look at me when we were teenagers, and he had something real to say, quiet and direct, like the rest of the world had gone on mute. He said, "Imani." I said, "Darius." He said, "You look exactly the same." I said, "You do not." He said, "Is that a bad thing?" I did not answer that. The street was mostly empty. A car passed. Somewhere down the block, someone was playing music from inside a house, something low and old school. I could not make out what it was. He took one step closer. His voice dropped. He said, "I still burn for you." And my heart, that stupid, traitorous heart, skipped a beat. I stood there in the cold and let those words land on me like I had no sense. I still burn for you. 18 years. That is how long it had been since Darius Coleman and I were anything to each other. 18 years since he stood on my porch with 2 duffel bags and told me his family was moving to Houston. And he did not know what that meant for us. We were 17. We cried. We promised things teenagers promise when they do not yet understand that promises need infrastructure to hold them up. He left. I stayed. And after about 4 months of phone calls that got shorter and letters that got further apart, we just quietly stopped. No big fight. No final conversation. Just silence that grew until it became permanent. I went to college at Illinois State. Came back. Started teaching. Built my life. And Darius Coleman, apparently built an empire. I looked at him standing there under the streetlight, looking like everything, and I said, "You do not get to say that to me." He said, "I know." I said, "Then why did you say it?" He said, "Because it is true, and I have been holding for a long time, and when I walked into that room and saw you standing there, I could not hold it anymore." I said, "Darius, you are trying to push my neighbors out of their homes." He said, "That is not what I am trying to do." I said, "That is what is happening." He said, "Those are two different things, and I would like the chance to explain the difference." I almost laughed, not because it was funny, because it was such a Darius thing to say. Even at 17, he was like that, precise. He never argued loud. He argued careful. He would take whatever you threw at him and hold it up to the light and find the angle you had not considered. It used to make me feel understood. Right now, it made me want to walk away. I said, "This is not the time or the place for this conversation." He said, then when I said, "I do not know, maybe never." He said, "Imani." I said, "Do not do that." He said, "Do what?" I said, "Say my name like that." He was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Like what?" And I did not answer, because if I answered, I would have had to admit that he still said my name the same way he did when we were young, soft at the front and steady at the end, like it meant something specific to him, like it was not just a name, but whole history compressed into 4 syllables. I said good night, and I walked to my car. He did not follow me. He just stood there and watched me go, and I felt his eyes on my back the whole way. I drove home with the radio off. My apartment is on the 3rd floor of a 2-flat on Racine. I have lived there for 6 years. My landlord is an older Haitian woman named Ms. Dorvelier, who lives downstairs and grows peppers on the back porch and leaves bags of plantains outside my door sometimes for no reason. I love that building. I love that block. I got inside, took off my coat, and sat down on my couch without turning on the lights. I thought about the meeting. I thought about Mrs. Patterson's building and Deshawn's mother, and the look on that older man's face when he asked if they were coming for homeowners too. I thought about my students and what it does to a child to be uprooted from the only neighborhood they have ever known, how that kind of disruption follows them into the classroom, how I have seen it before and it is never small. And then, because I am only human, I thought about Darius. I thought about the summer we were 15, and we used to sit on the hood of his uncle's car outside the ice cream shop on 75th and talk until it was dark. I thought about the way he used to laugh, big and sudden, like it caught him off guard. I thought about the night before he left when we sat on my grandmother's back porch and he held my hand, and neither of us said anything for almost an hour because there was nothing to say that would make it better. I thought about how I spent the better part of my 20s making sure I did not miss him. And I thought about how none of that work had apparently prepared me for him, standing 6 inches away from me smelling like something expensive and looking at me with those same eyes. I went to bed. I did not sleep well. The next morning I told my colleague and closest friend, a woman named Renee Patton, who taught 8th grade math and had opinions about everything, about what had happened. We were in the teacher's lounge before the first bell, both of us holding coffee like it was keeping us alive. Renee put her mug down and stared at me. She said, "Wait, the developer, the billionaire developer who is trying to buy up the whole South Side, that is your Darius?" I said, "He is not my Darius. He has not been my anything since we were teenagers." She said, "Imani, baby, that man came to that meeting personally. CEOs do not show up to community meetings in person. They send lawyers." I said, "I know." She said, "He came because he knew you would be there." I said, "He could not have known that." She looked at me the way she looks at students who have given a wrong answer with great confidence. I said, "Renee." She said, "I am just saying. Men who are worth that kind of money do not stand outside in Chicago cold in November to tell a woman they still burn for her unless they mean it." I did not say anything to that. She picked her mug back up and said, "Also, what does he look like now?" I said, "That is not relevant." She said, "Extremely relevant. Describe him." I said, "Renee, I have a class in 10 minutes." She said, "That is enough time. Go." I did not describe him, but I thought about it for the rest of the day. Quick pause. If you are feeling this story, hype it so others can find it. Comment where you are watching from. Now, back to the story. 3 days passed. I threw myself into work the way I always do when I am trying to not think about something. I graded papers. I planned lessons. I stayed late to work with a student named Marcus who was brilliant, but convinced he was not, which is a particular heartbreak of this job, watching a child not see what you can see so clearly. On the fourth day, I got a phone call from a number I did not recognize. I almost did not pick up. I was in the middle of making dinner. Oxtails that had been in the slow cooker since morning. The whole apartment smelling like my grandmother's kitchen. I picked up. Darius said, "I hope this is still your number." I said, "How did you get this number?" He said, "Brenda Okafor gave it to me." I told her I wanted to continue the conversation from the meeting. I said, "She should not have done that." He said, "She said the same thing. Then she gave it to me anyway." I almost smiled. That was very Brenda. I said, "What do you want, Darius?" He said, "I want to show you something. Not as a pitch. Not as a business thing. I want you to see what I am actually trying to build here. And I want you to tell me honestly what you think. Because your question at that meeting was the right question. And I want to give you the real answer." I said, "You can send me documents." He said, "Documents do not have context. Come see the site. 1 hour. You can bring Brenda if you want. Bring whoever you want." I was quiet. He said, "Imani, I am not the enemy." I said, "You might be." He said, "I know. That is why I am asking you to come see before you decide." I told him I would think about it. I hung up and stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand, and the smell of oxtails in the air, and I thought about what Renee said, about men who stand in the cold. I called Brenda. Brenda said, "I already told him I would go. You should come." I said, "You gave him my number." She said, "I gave him your number because that man is not here just for business, and we both know it, and sometimes you have to let things play out to know what they are." I said, "Brenda." She said, "I am 63 years old, and I have seen a lot of things. That man looked at you like you were the only person in a room full of 80 people. Now are you coming or not?" I said, "Fine." She said, "Good. Wear something warm. You know how that lakefront wind is." I said, "We are going to a construction site, not a date." She said, "I did not say anything about a date," but she was laughing when she hung up. We met Darius at the site on a Saturday morning. It was cold the way Chicago in late November is cold, the kind that gets into your bones before you even realize it is happening. I wore my heaviest coat and my good boots and told myself 3 times on the drive over that this was a community matter and nothing else. Brenda was already there when I pulled up, standing with her hands in her pockets, looking unbothered by the temperature the way older Chicago women do. Like the cold is just something that happens to other people. Darius was there with 2 members of his team. He was dressed down compared to the night of the meeting. Dark jeans, a heavy wool coat, boots. He looked less like a presentation, and more like a person. I was not sure if that made things easier or harder. He greeted Brenda first, which I noticed. He shook her hand with both of his and thanked her for coming. She looked him up and down the way she looks at everything, measuring. Then he looked at me and said, "Thank you for being here." I said, "I have not decided anything yet." He said, "I know. That is fine." He walked us through the site for the better part of an hour. And I will tell you, I went there prepared to be unimpressed. I went there with my arms crossed, figuratively speaking, ready to poke holes in whatever glossy vision he was selling. But what he showed us was not what I expected. Yes, there were going to be new units. Yes, they were going to be modern, and they were going to change the look of that stretch of King Drive. But the plan he walked us through on his tablet, the actual detailed plan, not the slide deck from the community meeting, had things in it I had not heard about. A community land trust that would keep 30% of new units permanently affordable, not just for the first 10 years, but in perpetuity, written into the deed. A right of return policy, giving current residents first access to the new units with a rent subsidy for first 3 years. A small business incubator on the ground floor of the main building, reserved specifically for black-owned businesses from the neighborhood, with below-market leases for the first 5 years, and a partnership with the Chicago Public Schools to fund a technology lab at Dunbar Prep. I stopped walking when he said that last part. I said, "Say that again." He said, A fully equipped technology lab at Dunbar. Computers, tablets, software, a part-time tech instructor funded for 3 years. We have already spoken to the principal. I looked at him. He said, I know that does not fix everything. I know there are still families who are going to be disrupted, and that is real, and I am not trying to paper over it. But I wanted you to see that I did not come back here to take. I came back here to build something that lasts. Brenda was quiet for a moment. Then she said, why did none of this come up at the meeting? Darius said, because we were not ready to announce the full plan yet. We wanted to have everything finalized before we made promises we could not keep. I should have moved faster on the community communication, and that is on me. Brenda said, yes, it is, but this is more than I expected. She looked at me. I looked at the ground. We wrapped up the site visit, and Brenda said she had somewhere to be. She shook Darius's hand again, told him she would be watching every step of this process, and walked to her car. I watched her go and understood that she had left deliberately. Darius and I stood there on the sidewalk. He said, can I buy you coffee? I said, I do not think that is a good idea. He said, just coffee. There's a place 2 blocks over that has been there since we were kids. I do not know if you still go there. I did still go there. It was called Pearls, and it had the best sweet potato pie in the city, and I went there at least twice a month. I said, fine. 1 cup. We walked. The wind had settled a little. The neighborhood was quiet the way Saturday mornings are quiet. A few people out. A church van parked outside an apartment building. Somebody's kid riding a bike on the sidewalk in a puffy coat that made him look like a small, colorful planet. Darius looked around as we walked like he was taking inventory, like he was checking what was still there. He said, the rec center is still standing. I said, they tried to close it twice. The neighborhood fought it both times. He said, that does not surprise me. I said, where have you been, Darius? All this time. He said, Houston for college, then New York for a few years. Then I started the company, and it kind of consumed everything for a long time. I put my head down and worked, and when I came up for air, I had built something I did not entirely expect to build. I said, you never came back. He said, no. I said, why? He was quiet for half a block. Then he said, because coming back meant dealing with what I left behind. And for a long time, I told myself I was not ready for that. I said, now? He said, now I am 35 years old, and I have everything I thought I wanted, and I still think about you more than I should. So I figured it was time to stop running from that. We got a Pearls. It was warm inside and smelled like coffee and cinnamon and something frying in the back. We got a table by the window. I ordered coffee and a slice of sweet potato pie because I was not going to let him make me too nervous to eat. He smiled when I ordered the pie. He said, some things do not change. I said, do not read into my pie order. He laughed, that same laugh, big and sudden like it caught him off guard. I felt it somewhere in my chest, and I did not appreciate that. We talked for 2 hours, not about the development, not about the neighborhood or the meeting or the politics of any of it. We talked like 2 people who had once known each other very well, and were finding out how much of that was still true. He told me about building his company from nothing, about the years when he was sleeping 4 hours a night and eating badly, and running on a specific kind of desperate energy that either breaks you or makes you. He told me about the moment he realized he had actually made it, sitting alone in a hotel room in Atlanta after closing his first major deal and feeling, of all things, sad. He said he did not understand the sadness for a long time. I told him about teaching, about what it actually means to stand in front of 30 12-year-olds every day and try to give them something real, about Marcus, my student, and the particular grief of watching a brilliant child not believe in himself, about the way this neighborhood had held me even in the years when I did not know I needed holding. He listened, not the way people listen when they are waiting for their turn to talk. He listened like it mattered. At some point the coffee cups were empty, and neither of us moved to leave. He said, I know I do not have a right to ask you for anything. I said, no, you do not. He said, I know 18 years is a long time and people change, and you built your whole life without me in it. I said, I did. He said, I am not asking you to undo any of that. I am just asking if there is any version of this where we find out who we are to each other now, not who we were. Now, I looked at him across that small table in pearls with the Saturday morning light coming to the window and the sound of the neighborhood outside, and I thought about all the ways I had protected my heart over the years, all the careful distance I had kept from anything that could undo me, and I thought about the fact that this man had come back, not just to Chicago, to this neighborhood, to this work, with a plan that had a technology lab in it for my school. I said, I am not making any promises. He said, I am not asking for promises. I said, and the development plan has to be right. All of it, not just the version you showed me today. It has to actually be right for the people who live here. If anything changes, if any of those commitments disappear, I will be the loudest voice against you, and you need to understand that. He said, I would not expect anything less. I said, and you do not get to just show up after 18 years and act like time is nothing. This is slow, whatever this is. He said, slow is fine. I have been waiting 18 years. I can wait a little longer. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I picked up my fork and finished my sweet potato pie. And for the first time since I walked into that community center and saw his face, I let myself breathe. Outside, the neighborhood was still there, still standing, still ours. And maybe, just maybe, so were we. What would you rate the story? Drop 0 to 10 in the comments right now. If this story moved you, hit subscribe for more emotional journeys every day. And if it truly touched your heart, consider leaving a super thanks. Your support helps us create more stories like this. Every contribution, big or small, means the world. Ready for the next story? It is even more dramatic than this one.